music.
In what forms?
There's a semblance of the keys to a piano.
I've noticed one thing I've never seen before is that little paddle with the green, yellow, and red. It looks like a paddle, but
He's framed, and there is drapery around it, but the drapery looks like moving materials.
When Anera asked me to do this, she said, pick a piece from the collection, and I chose this one because it is one of my favorite pieces here at the Hunter. I think it's because of the themes that it shows, the history, the travel, the past of African Americans. It has a lot of elements of what I would hear about as I grew up as a young black person. My family is from Meigs County, where they had a farm and they grew tobacco, and still have a farm today. There's a cemetery where all of my ancestors are buried, and there are things that are like this rusted up fence. So when I see the piece, it would just remind me of the history of not only my family, but my people. I pulled an activity that is a personal timeline. Plot some important personal milestones on the timeline. And then after you do that, plot some important personal racial milestones on the timeline.
In 1968, we were living in Chicago. That was the year that Martin Luther King was assassinated. It was also Bobby Kennedy's assassination. It was also the birth of my first child, and coincident with the Democratic Convention and the riots there. So that's a section I've got lots and lots of things written into. And we lived on the south side of Chicago, and there were riots that took place throughout the south side, which was predominantly the population, the black population of Chicago was concentrated on the south and west sides, and there were riots in both. We had a lot of friends who lived in the suburbs, and they feared for our safety. They wanted us to come to their homes in the suburbs to be safe. We didn't feel unsafe, but we did notice one night when we parked our car in a lot that was about a half block from our house. As we walked home, we were escorted by a police car because clearly he saw a danger. So then we started thinking, should we be worried? Because we hadn't been until that police car escorted us home.
I didn't go to school with blacks or Cubans, and I had never heard the N-word until basically about the 10th or 11th grade. That came up, and the first things that I remember, my parents were both Norwegian, and my father was excited when Ingemar Johansson beat Floyd Patterson and became the world heavyweight champion. And that was, the Great White Hope. It never even occurred to me that would, just didn't occur to me. And then when Martin Luther King won the Nobel Peace Prize, he was just so ashamed to be Scandinavian because we gave that to a black person at that point. And I remember those two things. It was the first time that but then my mother just clamped down on it big time, and it never discussed it. Never anything about that. So I grew up without really any awareness of it, of racism. And then I went off I went to the University of Florida, and I went off to Penn State University. And I will never forget, we were all riding down the street. It was my first or second week there, and there was a garbage truck, and there was a white garbage man, and I said, "That's a white garbage man." I was astounded. And then at that point, I started realizing how isolated I'd been and what was going on in the world.
What is your impression of race relations in Chattanooga now?
I worked for a company for 30 years in Tennessee, Nashville and here. And when I hired on, if you were black, there were 2 jobs available. You could be a janitor, or you could work on the coal pile at the powerhouse. I retired from a plant that had a black plant manager. It's evolving. The changes are slow, very, very slow. And I wouldn't be poor, black, and live south of I-24 for all the tea in China. To me, that's just, you talk about something, you stand over in Hickson and look, and you say, I don't see any damn answer at all. Short term, long term, medium term.
So you mean like in downtown Chattanooga or the metro area, it just seems almost hopeless to you?
Well, to me, let's take I-24, which was one of the worst things that happened to the black community in this town because it cut south of I-24 off from the rest of the city. And to me, there is a great deal of just plain hopelessness. The people that live there don't have any answers. The people that try to help them don't have many answers. You may have a few. But I don't think the city has many answers to help them. And I don't see that they have many answers to help themselves. And all I've got, my only feeling at my age and point in life, I sure am glad I'm not there. Because to be poor and black in Chattanooga is a lousy deal.
Well, I would say that to be poor in any race in Chattanooga is really a lousy deal. I do know that as I work and go into communities, I do see people who struggle a lot and who have many challenges. But having the opportunity to work in some of the rural areas, I see similar challenges, you know, among white populations. And I think what I've learned as I've gotten older is so many of our problems are more so related to lack of education and poverty, more so than anything. I mean, it's just, I think that's where the hopelessness comes from.
Well, you notice the word, I said poor first.
Yeah, poor.
Because being poor in Chattanooga is a lousy, you know, I've been in Chattanooga for 20-something years, and people ask me, what do I think of Chattanooga? And I tell people, and I've said this with great consistency, if you are white, if you have a decent paying job, it is a great place to live. If you're poor, it's a lousy place to live. If you're poor and black or Hispanic, it's an even worse place to live.
My mom taught in Cleveland city schools and in Bradley County schools. So and my dad was an engineer, so I did come from a different class level, I guess, than most of the people who I work with and serve every day. My mom taught in Cleveland city schools and in Bradley County schools. So and my dad was an engineer, so I did come from a different class level, I guess, than most of the people who I work with and serve every day. But there were spots in Cleveland where there were just terribly poverty-stricken white families. And my mother would take us, my sister and I, with her to do some home visits. And she wouldn't say anything, but I know that we would stand there and just look and, you know, see how people lived. And she really, you know, I think she was doing that to let us know that, you know, there are people who are, you are privileged, you know, there are parents that get up and work every day that have an income. You have a home, you have 2 cars, you have a dog that you can feed. Your life is very different from a lot of people just, you know, in the same neighborhood, the same city where you exist. It's not so much about race or racism, especially from my generation. It is really about poverty, education, and access to resources. And one of the things I really love about working at the Urban League is in our summer program, we have students who literally have no money. I mean, I've seen their income statements. The parent might make $4,000 or $5,000 a year. And then we have other ones that are in private schools like Baylor and Macaulay. We have homeschool students. And then in the summertime, they all just come together. And like you were saying, it's really that there's trepidation at first, but they all end up getting along, and they build friendships that last from year to year. So I think there is a lot positive that's going on.